Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Jackson Rivera was 67 years old when he died eating breakfast on a cruise ship in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. That's not the disturbing part. What happened to his body afterward? That's what keeps his wife awake at night. Jackson and Maria had saved for 2 years for this trip. 14 days aboard the Oceanic Majesty, visiting Greek islands and Italian coastlines. They'd raised 3 kids, worked their entire lives, and this was supposed to be their reward, their golden years moment. The ship was everything they'd imagined. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, endless food. For 5 days, they felt like royalty. Jackson even tried the rock-climbing wall, which made Maria laugh so hard she nearly cried. On the 6th morning, Jackson woke up with chest pain. He'd had these episodes before. His doctor said it was stress, nothing serious, so he didn't want to ruin the vacation by complaining. They went to breakfast like normal. Maria remembers how pale he looked, how he pushed eggs around his plate without eating. She asked if he was okay. He said he was just tired. Then his coffee cup hit the floor. The sound of it shattering was the last normal moment of Maria's life. Jackson collapsed right there in the dining room. Other passengers screamed. The ship's medical team came running. They did everything they could, but Jackson's heart had given out. Massive heart attack. He was pronounced dead at 9:47 a.m. The ship's doctor, Dr. Vasquez, was genuinely apologetic. She explained that Jackson would be taken to the ship's morgue and they'd make arrangements at the next port. Maria was numb with grief, but she trusted that her husband would be treated with dignity. Here's what Maria didn't know. The ship's morgue was full. 3 other passengers had already died on this cruise, and there was no room for Jackson's body. So the crew made a decision. They put Jackson in a storage room, an unrefrigerated maintenance closet next to paint cans and cleaning supplies. For 6 days, the Oceanic Majesty continued its cruise. Passengers danced at the nightly shows. Families ate at the buffets. Children splashed in the pools. The photographers kept taking smiling vacation photos, and Jackson Rivera decomposed in a storage closet below deck. The crew told Maria that everything was being handled properly. They assured her his body was being cared for. They lied to her face multiple times, while the smell from storage room C7 got so bad they had to use air fresheners to mask it. When the ship finally docked in Barcelona, Maria went to collect her husband's remains. The mortuary director, a kind man named Carlos, had to tell her the truth. After 6 days without refrigeration, Jackson's body had decomposed so badly that she couldn't even have a viewing. The man she'd loved for 42 years, who'd kissed her goodbye that last morning, was unrecognizable. Maria's lawsuit uncovered the internal emails. Crew members had joked about the smell. The captain knew, but chose to stay on schedule rather than make an emergency port call. They'd treated her husband's body like garbage, because dealing with it properly would have cost the cruise line money. She settled for $1.2 million. But no amount of money could give her back the chance to say goodbye to Jackson with dignity. No amount of money could erase the knowledge of what they'd done to him. The cruise industry calls this standard protocol when morgue facilities are at capacity. Maria calls it what it really is, treating human beings like they're less important than keeping passengers happy and maintaining the schedule. Jackson had boarded that ship expecting the vacation of a lifetime. Instead, he became another inconvenient death that the crew worked around while the party continued above. Maria never set foot on another cruise ship. She can't even look at travel brochures without seeing that storage room in her mind, imagining Jackson alone in the dark while people danced and laughed just a few decks above. Some nights, she still wakes up crying, thinking about those 6 days. Peyton Williams was 28, and on her honeymoon when the Carnival triumph turned into what the media would later call the poop cruise. She thought that was the worst thing that could happen on a vacation. She was wrong. Peyton and her husband Derek had saved for years for this trip. 5 days in the Caribbean, celebrating their new marriage. The ship was massive, like a floating city, and for the first day, everything was perfect. On the second day, February 10th, 2013, Peyton was reading by the pool when the alarm went off. Not the gentle chime that announced dinner, the emergency alarm that made everyone freeze. The captain's voice came over the intercom, trying to sound calm. "We are experiencing a technical difficulty in the engine room. Please remain calm." There had been a fire. The main engines were dead. The ship was drifting in the Gulf of Mexico with no power. At first, it didn't seem that bad. The crew organized deck parties. The bars stayed open. Peyton and Derek even joined a conga line, laughing about the unexpected adventure. But then the air conditioning died. The temperature inside the ship climbed into the 90s, and then the toilets stopped working. By the second day, raw sewage was backing up into the hallways. Brown water seeped under their cabin door. They piled towels against it, but the smell... God, the smell was everywhere. The crew handed out red biohazard bags. Those were the new toilets. Plastic bags. Peyton stood in line for food on the upper deck, holding her plastic bag toilet, wearing shoes wrapped in garbage bags because the carpets were soaked with sewage. This was her honeymoon. By the third day, sewage was dripping from the ceilings. People held up umbrellas inside the ship to avoid the constant rain of human waste. Peyton tied her wedding veil around her face as a mask. Families fought over packages of crackers. Elderly passengers collapsed from the heat. Children cried constantly. The veneer of civilization was peeling away in the 100-degree heat and overwhelming stench. Derek kept trying to stay positive. "Someday we'll look back on this and laugh," he said. "Our kids will love hearing about the poop cruise." Peyton wanted to believe him, but she was watching people she'd seen dressed elegantly at dinner now fighting over warm soda and stale sandwiches. On the 5th day, tugboats finally arrived to tow them to Mobile, Alabama. When Peyton stepped onto solid ground after 6 hours of waiting to disembark, her legs nearly gave out. Clean air had never felt so precious. The cruise line gave them compensation and vouchers for future cruises. Peyton and Derek never used them. They couldn't imagine voluntarily getting back on a ship after living through that nightmare. Years later, friends still ask about their honeymoon. Peyton smiles and explains that they learned more about each other in those 5 days than most couples learn in a lifetime. They'd seen each other, filthy, exhausted, and desperate, and had chosen to love each other anyway. But sometimes, late at night, she still dreams about that smell. And she wakes up checking to make sure she's not back on that ship, trapped in the heat and the sewage with nowhere to go but the endless ocean around them. Dr. Astrid Larson didn't believe in ghosts. As a marine biologist, she'd spent her career studying the ocean through scientific observation. Superstitions were just stories people told themselves. So when she booked a solo cruise through the Norwegian fjords, she wasn't worried about the ship's reputation for paranormal activity. She just wanted a quiet vacation. Her cabin was 7B, midway along the 7th deck. Small but comfortable, decorated in blues and whites. Nothing unusual. The first night, the phone rang at 2:17 a.m. Astrid answered, expecting a wrong number or maybe a crew announcement. "Hello?" Silence, but not empty silence. Something was there. She could hear what sounded like whispers, so faint she couldn't make out words. "Hello? Is someone there?" The line went dead. Astrid hung up and tried to go back to sleep. Crossed wires, probably. Technical glitch. She'd mention it to guest services in the morning. But she couldn't sleep. The normal ship sounds seemed wrong somehow. There was a groaning that seemed to come from inside the walls, low and constant. In the morning, she reported the call. The woman at the guest services desk smiled politely. "We've been having phone system issues. Just unplug the phone if it happens again." That night, Astrid unplugged the phone before bed. She could see the cord lying on the nightstand, disconnected. At 2:17 a.m., the phone rang anyway. Astrid sat up in bed, staring. The phone was definitely unplugged. This was impossible, but it kept ringing. She picked up the receiver. "Who is this?" The whispers were clearer this time. Multiple voices, overlapping, speaking in Norwegian. The tone was desperate, pleading. Then one word cut through, "Please, please help." The line went dead. Astrid examined the phone carefully. No connection, no battery backup. No way it should have worked. She spent the rest of the night researching the ship's history. What she found made her skin crawl. The Northern Star had been built using salvaged materials from other ships. The phone system came from a vessel called the Midnight Sun, which had been decommissioned after an accident in 2018. During a storm, 17 passengers had died when their lifeboat capsized during evacuation. They'd been trapped in freezing water, calling for help that never came. Astrid found the passenger manifest: families, elderly couples, young people who just wanted to see the Arctic. The third night, she waited for the call. At 2:17 a.m., the unplugged phone rang again. When she answered, she heard names being called. "Eric, Mama, help us." Prayers in Norwegian. The sound of rushing water, desperate gasps for air. "I hear you," Astrid whispered. "I know what happened to you. I'm sorry." The whispers intensified. Then she heard something that sounded like gratitude, mixed with continued pleading. The cabin's temperature dropped until she could see her breath. Frost formed on the bathroom mirror. She heard what sounded like a child's voice. "That's not what she meant." "No, wait, that didn't make sense." The next morning, Astrid met with the captain. When she mentioned the names she'd heard, his face went pale. "Those are the passengers from the Midnight Sun," he said quietly. "Several guests have reported experiences in 7B. The room was built using materials from their communications center. They moved her to a different cabin, but even there, she would wake at 2:17 a.m. with the sensation of being watched. She would hear faint whispers from the ventilation system. She would find wet handprints on her mirror, small handprints, like a child's. On her last night aboard, Astrid returned to 7B. A crew member had let her in, sympathetic to her request for one final visit. At 2:17 a.m., the phone rang. This time the voices were different, calmer, peaceful. She heard, clearly. "Thank you, lady. We can rest now." The line went dead. The temperature returned to normal. The groaning sound stopped. For the first time in days, Astrid felt truly alone in the room. When she disembarked the next morning, she was changed. The scientist who had boarded believing only in what she could measure had learned that some things can't be explained by conventional means. The Northern Star kept sailing, but cabin 7B stayed empty. And the crew reported that the phenomena had stopped completely after Astrid's final night there. She still thinks about those voices sometimes, especially at 2:17 a.m. when she wakes in her own bed thousands of miles from any ocean and wonders if they really found peace, or if they're still out there somewhere, calling for help that never comes. Marcus Rivera shouldn't have been on that balcony at 2:30 in the morning. He definitely shouldn't have been drinking whiskey with Diana Walsh while his wife slept 3 decks below. And he absolutely shouldn't have been having an affair with his business partner's wife. But poor decisions have a way of snowballing into catastrophe. The Caribbean princess was hosting Marcus's company retreat. 200 employees and their families sailing through the Caribbean for a week of team building. It should have been perfect for strengthening professional relationships. Instead, it became the setting for an affair that nearly killed them both. Diana was everything Marcus's wife Jennifer wasn't. Spontaneous, reckless, exciting. They'd been meeting secretly every night on the upper deck, sharing drinks and stolen kisses while their spouses attended the evening shows. The danger of being caught only made it more thrilling. On this particular night, they'd both been drinking heavily. Started with champagne at dinner, moved to wine during the jazz performance, ended with the bottle of whiskey Marcus had smuggled up to the balcony. "We could do this forever," Diana whispered, arms around his neck. "Just disappear together." Marcus laughed. "You're drunk." "Maybe, but I'm also serious." The ship rocked from a larger wave. Marcus grabbed the railing to steady himself. The whiskey bottle slipped from his hand, shattering on the balcony floor. "We should go back," Marcus said. "If someone sees us—" But Diana pulled him into a kiss. Marcus responded despite his better judgment. They pressed against each other in the narrow balcony space. That's when Marcus stepped backward, his foot slipping on spilled whiskey. He grabbed for the railing, but his grip was compromised by the alcohol. Diana, still clinging to him, was pulled along. Together they fell 40 feet into the dark Caribbean water. The impact was like hitting concrete. Marcus felt the air driven from his lungs. The cold ocean shocked him instantly sober. Beside him, Diana surfaced, gasping and sputtering, her dress already dragging her down. Above them, the massive cruise ship continued its course. Its lights were growing smaller with each second. "Help!" Diana screamed. "Somebody help us!" But no one had witnessed their fall. The company retreat passengers were in their cabins or at the entertainment venues. The upper deck balconies were supposed to be empty. They had chosen the perfect spot for secret meetings, and now that isolation was going to kill them. The ship disappeared into the darkness. "We have to get out of these clothes," Marcus gasped. "They're going to drag us down." With tremendous effort, Marcus shed his jacket and shoes. Diana struggled with her dress, and Marcus had to help her while both fought to stay afloat. The process was exhausting, terrifying. "How long can we survive?" Diana asked, panic rising in her voice. Marcus tried to calculate. Water temperature was maybe 78 degrees. Warm enough to prevent immediate hypothermia, but cold enough to sap their strength over time. Without life preservers, they'd have to rely on swimming ability and sheer will to survive. If rescue came. If. Diana remembered something she'd read about using pants as flotation devices. Working together, they managed to remove their jeans while treading water. They tied off the legs and inflated them by trapping air inside. The makeshift flotation devices weren't perfect, but they kept their heads above water without constant effort. Marcus felt a surge of hope. They might actually survive until morning, when their absence would be noticed. But surviving the night was only the beginning. As hours passed, they faced challenges they'd never imagined. Jellyfish drifted past, translucent and ghostly. Several times, Marcus felt tentacles brush his legs, sending jolts of stinging pain through his body. "Don't panic," he told Diana. "They hurt, but they're not fatal." But the jellyfish were nothing compared to the psychological terror of being lost at sea. Every shadow could be a shark, every sound could be a predator. The ocean that had seemed so beautiful from the ship's deck now felt hostile, designed to kill them slowly. As dawn approached, they were both showing signs of severe exhaustion and dehydration. Salt water had burned their throats raw. Their lips were cracked and bleeding. Their improvised flotation devices were losing air. "I can't do this much longer," Diana whispered. Marcus felt the same crushing fatigue, but he forced himself to stay alert. Just a little longer. Someone will find us." The sound of helicopter rotors came at hour 18. The Coast Guard had been alerted when they failed to appear for the morning breakfast. A full-scale search had been launched, helicopters and boats combing the area. Marcus and Diana were pulled from the water badly sunburned, covered in jellyfish stings, dehydrated, exhausted, but alive. The aftermath was almost as traumatic as the ordeal itself. Their affair was now public knowledge. Both marriages were destroyed. Marcos's business partnership ended, but they had saved each other's lives in the most literal sense. Their relationship didn't survive the return to dry land. The trauma combined with the wreckage of their respective marriages proved too much, but they had faced the ocean's vast indifference and emerged victorious. Marcus thinks about that night often. The decisions that led to their fall were reckless and selfish, but their survival required courage, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to live. They had been tested in the most fundamental way possible. And sometimes, late at night, Marcus wakes up tasting salt water and feeling invisible tentacles brush against his skin. He's back in that endless dark ocean, fighting to stay alive, wondering if the helicopter will come in time. The Caribbean Princess still sails its regular routes, but Marcus has never been on a ship since. He can't even look at the ocean without remembering those 18 hours when he and Diana learned exactly what they were capable of when death was the alternative. If you're still listening, you probably enjoy stories like this. A like or comment helps keep them alive. Taylor Harrison was 14 years old when she boarded the Royal Caribbean Navigator with her parents. It was supposed to be the family vacation of a lifetime. The teen club looked perfect in the brochures. Supervised activities, trustworthy staff, a safe space for teenagers to meet other kids their age. What the brochures didn't mention was that predators actively seek out positions that give them access to vulnerable young people. And cruise ships provide the perfect hunting ground. Jake Morrison was the teen club coordinator, 26 years old, charming, with impeccable references and a clean background check. He had a gift for making teenagers feel special. From the moment Taylor entered the teen club, Jake singled her out for attention. He complimented her intelligence, praised her maturity, made her feel understood in a way her parents never did. "You're not like the other kids," Jake told her during their second day at sea. "You're more mature, more thoughtful. I can tell you're going to do great things." For a 14-year-old who often felt overlooked, this attention was intoxicating. Over the next few days, Jake began isolating Taylor from the other teenagers. He convinced her she was too sophisticated for their childish games. He invited her to help with special projects that required them to be alone in storage rooms or empty areas of the ship. "I really appreciate your help," Jake would say, standing closer than necessary. "You're so much more responsible than the other kids." The grooming was methodical. Jake shared personal stories about his difficult childhood, creating a sense of intimacy. He asked about her family problems, her insecurities, her dreams. He gathered information he could use to manipulate her emotions. When Taylor mentioned feeling misunderstood by her parents, Jake nodded sympathetically. Adults often fail to recognize maturity in young people like you. By the fourth day, Jake had successfully isolated Taylor and established himself as her primary source of validation. He began introducing physical contact gradually, a hand on her shoulder, a hug that lasted too long. Casual touches that made Taylor feel both excited and confused. The assault happened on the 5th night in a storage room adjacent to the teen club. Jake had lured Taylor there under the pretense of preparing for the next day's activities. The room was soundproofed, located in a part of the ship where foot traffic was minimal. Jake had chosen the location carefully. What happened in that storage room would haunt Taylor for years. Jake's careful grooming left her confused, unsure whether she was partially responsible. The assault was brutal and traumatic, but the psychological manipulation had been so effective that Taylor initially blamed herself. After the assault, Jake's demeanor changed completely. The charming mentor was replaced by someone cold and threatening. "No one will believe you," he told her. "You came here willingly. Think about what this would do to your parents. They saved for years for this vacation. Do you really want to ruin it?" Taylor returned to her family that night, broken and traumatized. She said nothing. She couldn't eat dinner. She avoided the teen club for the rest of the cruise. Her parents noticed the change, but attributed it to typical teenage moods. For 6 months, Taylor kept the secret. She threw herself into schoolwork, trying to maintain the appearance of normalcy while battling nightmares, panic attacks, and crushing shame. The truth finally came out during a family therapy session. When the therapist asked about traumatic experiences, Taylor broke down. The investigation revealed that Taylor wasn't Jake's only victim. 3 other families came forward with similar stories. Jake had perfected his predatory techniques over years, and the cruise ship environment had provided perfect opportunities. Jake Morrison was eventually convicted and sentenced to 15 years. The cruise line settled out of court, paying substantial damages while admitting no wrongdoing. But for Taylor, the recovery was long and difficult. Years of therapy, learning to trust again, understanding that the assault wasn't her fault. She eventually became an advocate for other survivors, using her experience to help young people recognize warning signs of predatory behavior. Taylor's story isn't unique. It represents countless young people victimized by trusted authority figures in positions of power. Predators are drawn to environments where they have access to vulnerable youth. And cruise ships provide isolation, relaxed atmospheres, and opportunities for abuse. For Taylor's parents, the experience forever changed their understanding of their role as protectors. They learned that evil hides behind friendly smiles and impressive credentials. The Royal Caribbean Navigator still sails the Mediterranean. New families board every week, creating memories that will last a lifetime. But for those who know the truth about what can happen in the hidden corners of these floating cities, the sparkle of the ocean will always be tinged with the knowledge that predators walk among us. Taylor never took another cruise, but her courage in speaking out helped protect other young people from suffering the same fate. Sometimes the most important stories are the hardest to tell, and sometimes a voice speaking from pain and trauma becomes a beacon of hope for others who have been silenced by shame and fear. Vincent Kowalski had been drinking since noon. By 11:30 p.m., other passengers crossed to the other side of the deck to avoid him. The 42-year-old construction foreman from Detroit had boarded the Carnival Breeze with his wife Linda for what was supposed to be a second honeymoon, a last attempt to save their 20-year marriage. Instead, the cruise became a floating battleground where Vincent's alcoholism and explosive temper were magnified by the claustrophobic environment and unlimited access to alcohol. For 4 days, Vincent made himself notorious. He'd been cut off from 3 bars. He'd screamed at a family at the buffet. He'd made female passengers uncomfortable with aggressive behavior. The ship's security had issued 2 warnings. Vincent was on the edge of being confined to his cabin. Linda had endured 20 years of Vincent's drinking and the verbal abuse that came with it. She'd hoped the cruise would help them reconnect. Instead, she spent most of her time hiding in their cabin, avoiding the embarrassment of being seen with him. The final confrontation began in the main dining room during late dinner. Vincent had somehow convinced a server to bring him drinks despite being officially cut off. His voice was loud and slurred as he told inappropriate stories. Then he turned to Linda. "You know what your problem is? You're a frigid bitch who can't stand to see a man have a good time." The dining room went silent. Dozens of people stared at the unfolding domestic drama. Linda had endured this kind of abuse countless times in private. Having it happen into public was a new level of degradation. "Vincent, please, can we just go back to our room?" But Vincent was beyond reason. He slammed his glass down, sending wine splashing across the table and onto a nearby woman's dress. Don't you dare tell me what to do. I paid for this cruise. I'll do whatever I want. Linda stood slowly. After 20 years, something inside her finally snapped. I want a divorce. I can't do this anymore, Vincent. I'm done. The words hit Vincent like a physical blow. He stood so quickly his chair toppled backward. For a moment, Linda thought he might actually strike her in front of all these witnesses. Instead, he stormed out, pushing past servers and knocking over a wine display. Linda followed at a distance, knowing his anger needed time to burn out. By the time she reached their cabin on deck 9, Vincent was on the balcony with a bottle of whiskey, leaning against the railing. The balcony was 30 feet above the ocean. "Vincent, please come inside. You're scaring me." "Good. Maybe you should be scared." Linda felt a chill. There was something different about Vincent's demeanor tonight. A reckless desperation that suggested he might be capable of anything. "I'm going to call security. You need help." Vincent spun around so quickly he nearly lost his balance. "You're not calling anyone. You created this mess. You're going to deal with it." What happened next would be debated for months. Whether it was a genuine suicide attempt, a manipulative gesture to frighten Linda, or simply catastrophically impaired judgment, Vincent Kowalski climbed over the balcony railing and let go. Linda's scream echoed across the ship's upper decks as she watched her husband plummet toward the dark ocean. The fall seemed to take forever, his body spinning through the air before disappearing into the water. But Vincent Kowalski's story didn't end in the Caribbean that night. In what could only be described as a miracle of timing and extraordinary luck, Vincent's falling body struck the ship's lifeboat on deck 4. He bounced off the rubberized surface and landed in the boat's interior instead of continuing into the ocean. The impact knocked him unconscious and broke 3 ribs. But it also saved his life in the most improbable way possible. The medical team found Vincent 40 minutes later, unconscious in lifeboat number 7 with a blood alcohol level that should have killed him. He had somehow survived a 30-foot plunge by landing in the one spot that could cushion his impact. The odds were astronomically small. Crew members joked that Vincent was either incredibly lucky or too drunk to die. The incident created chaos throughout the ship. Vincent's fall had been witnessed by dozens of people. Conflicting stories about whether it was suicide, accident, or domestic violence began circulating. Linda found herself in the surreal position of being both relieved her husband was alive and horrified by the circumstances. Other passengers looked at her with a mixture of sympathy and suspicion. When Vincent regained consciousness the next morning, he had no memory of the previous night. He was shocked to learn he jumped from their balcony. The remaining days of the cruise were a nightmare of legal interviews, medical examinations, and media attention. Vincent was confined to the medical bay under psychiatric observation. Linda struggled with constant stares and whispers from passengers who recognized her. When the ship docked in Miami, Vincent was transferred to a mainland hospital. The FBI launched an investigation. The cruise line faced questions about alcohol service policies. Linda went through with her divorce, using the incident as evidence of Vincent's dangerous behavior. Vincent was ordered to undergo alcohol treatment and anger management. He was banned from several cruise lines for life. The incident became a cautionary tale about excessive drinking and domestic violence. But it also became a legend about the man who was too drunk to die. For Linda, the cruise that was supposed to be a second honeymoon became the final chapter of their marriage, played out in the most dramatic and public way possible. Years later, Vincent would claim he had no intention of surviving the fall, that his jump was genuine despair. But the fact remained. He had chosen to make his gesture in a way that maximized trauma for his wife and the other witnesses. His survival was miraculous, but it couldn't undo the damage or erase the memory of that night. The balcony plunge became an unintended metaphor for their entire marriage, a reckless leap that should have ended in disaster, but resulted in an improbable survival nobody wanted. Vincent lived to face the consequences. But the cost of his survival was measured in broken relationships, shattered trust, and the knowledge that sometimes the most dramatic gestures only reveal the depth of our failures. The lifeboat that saved his life became a symbol of the second chance he would spend years trying to earn, one day at a time. The alarm that pierced through the Ocean Majesty at 2:17 a.m. wasn't the gentle chime for meal times. This was the emergency signal every crew member dreaded. 3 long blasts, 2 short, repeated continuously. Marcus Chen, head of security, had hoped he'd never hear that sequence in his 15 years at sea. Someone was missing. James Patterson, 45, businessman from Chicago, traveling alone. Seemed like any other solo traveler when he'd boarded 3 days earlier. Quiet, polite, kept to himself. Nobody had seen James since 11:30 p.m., when he'd left the casino after winning at blackjack. His cabin steward noticed his bed hadn't been slept in. Initially assumed he'd spent the night elsewhere. But when James missed his scheduled shore excursion, the staff suspected something was wrong. The search protocol was exhaustive. Every crew member, regardless of shift, was called to search teams. The ship was divided into zones. Every possible hiding place was checked. Marcus coordinated from the security center, watching monitors showing feeds from hundreds of cameras. The footage showed James leaving the casino at 11:32 p.m., walking toward the elevators. He took one to deck 12, stepped out, walked toward the bow area. Then he disappeared from the surveillance system entirely. Search teams worked through the night. They checked every bathroom, closet, maintenance area. The medical center was searched twice. Pool areas were examined with underwater lights. Even the laundry facilities. As hours passed without any trace, the search expanded to crew quarters, mechanical spaces, food storage, waste management. Passengers realized someone had vanished from their floating sanctuary. Families huddled in cabins. The ship's announcements every 30 minutes only heightened the unease. By 4 a.m., the most terrifying possibilities seemed inevitable. James had gone overboard. The Coast Guard was contacted. Helicopters and patrol boats converged on the ship's position. The Ocean Majesty reversed course, retracing its path. Massive searchlights swept the ocean surface. Passengers who'd been curious were now genuinely frightened. If James could simply disappear, their own safety wasn't guaranteed. The breakthrough came at 6:45 a.m. A crew member searching the waste management area discovered something chilling. James Patterson's wallet, room key, shoes, and jacket, arranged in a neat pile in a maintenance corridor near the stern, as if James had deliberately placed them there before doing something that required removing them. But James was nowhere to be found. The discovery shifted the search from rescue to potential crime scene investigation. The FBI was contacted. Crew members who found the items were isolated and questioned. The area was cordoned off with yellow tape. Marcus found himself dealing with a nightmare beyond a simple missing person case. The presence of James's belongings suggested either suicide or foul play. Both created massive liability issues. Passengers experienced paranoia that transformed their luxury vacation into a floating horror. If James had been murdered, the killer was still on board. Families locked cabin doors. They avoided being alone. Restaurants and entertainment venues felt like potential crime scenes. The ocean search continued for 3 days. No trace of James Patterson was ever found. The Coast Guard eventually called it off. The Ocean Majesty completed its cruise, but the atmosphere had been permanently altered. The investigation consumed months, but never answered what happened to James Patterson. Security footage showed him walking toward the bow, but cameras in that area had been experiencing technical difficulties that night, a gap in surveillance that coincided perfectly with his disappearance. Some theorized suicide, Others insisted murder. The crew developed theories ranging from accidental death to insurance fraud. None explained why James's belongings were found so far from where he was last seen. The case remained officially open. James Patterson became another name in the growing list of people who vanished from cruise ships without explanation. His family hired investigators and filed lawsuits, but never found satisfying answers. For passengers aboard the Ocean Majesty that night, the experience fundamentally changed their perception of cruise safety. They'd learned that even on a vessel carrying thousands, someone could simply disappear without a trace. Marcus Chen continued in cruise ship security for 3 more years. But he never forgot the helpless feeling of searching for someone who'd vanished into thin air. The Ocean Majesty continued its schedule. New cameras were installed. Security patrols increased. Passengers received more information about nighttime dangers. But these changes couldn't address the deeper truth. In the middle of the ocean, surrounded by thousands of people, it was still possible to be completely alone. James Patterson's disappearance would never be solved, but it served as a reminder that cruise ships, despite their paradise reputation, could become settings for the darkest human experiences. The man who walked toward the bow that night took his secrets into whatever fate awaited him. And the survivors were left wondering if they'd ever feel truly safe while floating on endless water that could swallow a human being without leaving a ripple. Some mysteries are too dark to ever be understood. The celebrity eclipse attracted sophisticated clientele who valued elegance during Caribbean vacations. The marketing emphasized refined atmosphere, fine dining, cultural programs. What happened on March 15th would forever shatter that carefully cultivated image. The trouble began in the sports bar where college friends were celebrating spring break with reckless abandon. Among them was someone later identified only as Passenger X in incident reports. 22 years old, whose name was sealed by legal proceedings. He'd been drinking steadily since departure. Beer, shots, tropical cocktails that would have incapacitated most people hours earlier. By 10:30 p.m., Passenger X had reached a level beyond normal drunkenness into the realm of alcohol poisoning, speech completely incoherent, no motor function control, inhibitions vanished entirely. The bartenders had cut him off hours earlier, but his friends kept supplying drinks, treating his deteriorating condition as entertainment. The first sign came when Passenger X began vomiting violently in the sports bar, projectile vomiting across tables, chairs, other patrons. The smell was overwhelming. Alcohol, partially digested food, stomach acid. Instead of seeking help, his companions moved him to a different location. What happened next would haunt everyone who witnessed it. Passenger X stumbled out and began wandering the corridors, condition deteriorating rapidly. Extreme intoxication combined with complete psychological breakdown created chaos that transformed a quiet evening into a nightmare. The rampage began on Deck 7 near the shopping area. Families browsing souvenirs, elderly couples enjoying evening walks. Passenger X appeared suddenly, completely naked, covered in his own vomit and feces, stumbling through the corridor like something from a horror movie. The sight was so shocking, most people froze. 8-year-old Emma Rodriguez was holding her mother's hand when the naked, defecating man appeared. The child's screams echoed through the corridor. Her mother tried to shield Emma's eyes, but the damage was done. The smell was indescribable. Human waste, vomit, sour stench of someone who'd lost all bodily control. Passengers fled in all directions. Some ran toward elevators, others pressed against walls, desperate to avoid contact, the elegant corridor filled with screams of terror and disgust. Passenger X seemed oblivious, stumbling forward. As he moved through the ship, he left a trail of bodily fluids, creating a biohazard requiring professional cleanup. The ship's security team responded quickly, but narrow corridors and crowds of panicked passengers made it difficult. By the time they arrived on Deck 7, Passenger X had moved on. Traumatized passengers huddled in doorways, children crying. The smell permeated everything despite powerful ventilation. The chase continued through multiple decks into the ship's most public areas. He stumbled through the main atrium where a string quartet performed for guests enjoying after-dinner drinks. The elegant scene shattered as the naked man appeared at the top of the grand staircase. Several passengers nearly fell in their haste to escape. The medical team finally intercepted Passenger X near the main dining room. Subduing him required multiple crew members. His resistance was violent and irrational. More bodily fluids spread across common areas. The medical staff treated him like a biohazard, using protective equipment normally reserved for infectious disease outbreaks. The aftermath was almost as traumatic. Housekeeping worked through the night to decontaminate affected areas. Industrial-grade cleaning supplies, specialized equipment, carpets replaced, furniture professionally cleaned, ventilation system purged. The psychological impact on passengers was severe. The Rodriguez family immediately disembarked at the next port and flew home, their vacation ruined. Isabella Rodriguez later sued for psychological trauma, arguing the cruise line failed to protect her family. Other passengers experienced similar trauma, particularly those in enclosed spaces when Passenger X appeared. Elevators shut down for extensive cleaning after multiple people vomited. Elegant dining venues and shopping areas became associated with horror and disgust. The cruise line faced immediate legal action. Multiple passengers argued the incident could have been prevented if staff had properly monitored alcohol consumption. Bartenders were questioned. Security footage revealed his condition had been deteriorating visibly for hours. The incident exposed serious gaps in emergency response protocols. Security had been trained for fights, theft, medical emergencies. Not someone who was simultaneously a medical emergency, biohazard, and public safety threat. Crew members had no protective equipment and were potentially exposed to dangerous pathogens. Passenger X was confined to medical facilities for the remainder under constant supervision and sedation. His friends, who'd enabled his dangerous intoxication, were confined to cabins, faced potential criminal charges. Investigation revealed they'd been supplying alcohol long after he should have been hospitalized. The Celebrity Eclipse completed its cruise, but the atmosphere was permanently altered. Passengers who booked for sophisticated ambiance found themselves dealing with a situation belonging in a mental hospital. The incident became a cautionary tale about excessive alcohol and recognizing medical emergencies. Legal proceedings lasted years. Multiple lawsuits. The cruise line eventually settled most claims, paying substantial damages while implementing new policies. Industry-wide changes followed in how cruise ships handle intoxicated passengers and respond to medical emergencies. For witnesses, the experience served as a brutal reminder that even in civilized environments, human behavior can descend into chaos with frightening speed. The image of that naked man, stumbling through elegant corridors, would haunt them for years. The incident highlighted vulnerability of children in environments where adults are expected to behave responsibly. Emma Rodriguez's trauma was particularly severe. She'd witnessed something no child should see. Recovery required extensive therapy. Crew members who responded also suffered psychological trauma. Many required counseling. Several left the cruise industry entirely. The Celebrity Eclipse continued its schedule. New safety protocols implemented, stricter alcohol policies, enhanced medical monitoring, improved emergency response, but memories lingered. The incident became a case study in crisis management and passenger safety, used to train staff, but for those who experienced it firsthand, no training could erase that memory. The naked rampage served as a reminder that even carefully controlled environments can be disrupted by human behavior, defying rational explanation. Passengers who booked for elegance learned that refinement is fragile, shattered in an instant. The incident forever changed how they viewed cruise safety and the importance of maintaining standards, protecting everyone from chaos emerging when human nature is stripped of civilizing influence. Captain Morrison had been sailing cruise ships for 32 years. He thought he'd seen everything the ocean could throw at him. Storms that could crack steel, medical emergencies challenging the finest hospitals, mechanical failures testing every ounce of seamanship. But nothing prepared him for what happened aboard the Mystique of the Seas during a seemingly routine Caribbean cruise. The Mystique was a mid-sized vessel carrying 2,400 passengers. This particular voyage was marketed as a paranormal investigation cruise. Lectures on ghost hunting, psychic phenomena, supernatural experiences. Captain Morrison had been skeptical of the theme, harmless entertainment for guests who enjoyed scary stories. He never imagined the paranormal activities would extend beyond scheduled programming. The trouble began on the third night when off-duty crew members decided to conduct their own séance in the employee recreation area. Led by Marina Vulov, 28-year-old entertainment coordinator from Russia, the group had been inspired by passenger activities. Marina had studied folklore in college. She convinced colleagues their séance would be harmless. 6 crew members sat in a circle around a makeshift Ouija board in a small storage room converted to a break area. Marina arranged candles. The atmosphere was initially light-hearted, participants joking and laughing as they asked about love lives and careers. "Is there anyone here who wants to speak with us?" Marina asked theatrically. The planchette remained motionless for several minutes. The group began losing interest. Then slowly, deliberately, the piece began moving across the board. HELPUSS. The crew members looked at each other nervously. Each denied moving it. Marina felt a cold chill. None of them seemed to be controlling the board. The candles flickered despite no breeze. The room's temperature dropped several degrees. "Who are you?" Marina asked, now genuinely frightened. The response came quickly. WEARETHEFORGOTTEN. The séance participants sat in stunned silence. The ship's records showed 17 passengers had died during various cruises over the past decade. Deaths attributed to natural causes, accidents, suicides. The planchette continued moving, spelling names some crew members recognized from incident reports. Marina tried to end the séance, but the spirits seemed reluctant to let them go. The planchette moved frantically, spelling pleas for help and desperate messages. Candles flickered more violently. Several participants reported feeling invisible hands touching their shoulders. "We need to stop this," whispered Carlos, the assistant cruise director. But when Marina tried to lift her hands, she found she couldn't move them. An invisible force held her fingers in place. Other participants reported the same. They were trapped, unable to break the connection. The messages became more coherent. The spirits described details about their deaths never made public. Cover-ups, negligence, deliberate concealment. Then physical manifestations began. Lights flickered in patterns corresponding to board messages. Objects moved on their own. They heard voices in unfamiliar languages. Temperature continued dropping until breath became visible. Frost formed on metal surfaces. Captain Morrison first learned about the séance when Marina's supervisor reported the entertainment staff failed to report for evening duties. A search led to discovery of 6 participants still seated around the Ouija board, apparently unable to move or speak. The medical team was called, but Dr. Elizabeth Harper found no physical explanation. The crew members appeared in some trance state. Vital signs stable, but responses minimal. Aware of surroundings, but unable to break their connection. Most disturbing, The room's temperature was 20 degrees colder than surrounding areas despite functioning heating. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Harper reported. "They're not unconscious, but not fully responsive. It's as if they're communicating with something we can't see." Captain Morrison involved the ship's chaplain, Father Michael O'Brien, who had experience counseling passengers claiming supernatural experiences. Father O'Brien arrived carrying a Bible and holy water. The moment he entered, paranormal activity intensified dramatically. Candles extinguished by invisible force. The Ouija board moved on its own, spelling messages so rapidly it was difficult to follow. Crew members began speaking in unison, voices taking different accents as they channeled deceased passengers. "We were murdered," Marina said, her voice carrying a distinctive Norwegian accent. "The cruise line covered up our deaths." Other crew members began speaking, each channeling a different deceased passenger, revealing details never made public. Medical negligence, safety violations, deliberate concealment painting a picture of systematic corruption. Father O'Brien recited prayers and sprinkled holy water, but spiritual activity intensified. The spirits were determined to tell their stories. Captain Morrison made a decision that would forever change his career. Instead of trying to end the séance, he decided to listen. He entered the storage room and addressed the entities directly, promising to investigate their claims and ensure their stories would be heard. The moment he made his promise, supernatural activity began subsiding. Crew members gradually regained ability to move and speak normally. Room temperature returned to normal. The Ouija board fell silent. The overwhelming sense of presence slowly dissipated. But the aftermath was far from over. Crew members who participated were forever changed. Several left the cruise industry entirely. Marina became obsessed with investigating passenger deaths, eventually leaving to become a paranormal investigator specializing in maritime mysteries. Captain Morrison kept his promise, launching a private investigation into passenger deaths mentioned during the séance. What he discovered confirmed many claims: medical records falsified, safety violations covered up, deaths classified as natural causes, or accidents showed signs of negligence or worse. Investigation led to congressional hearings, regulatory changes, massive legal settlements. Captain Morrison's career effectively ended by his decision to pursue truth, but he never regretted listening to voices of the dead. The mystique of the seas continued its schedule, but paranormal activity didn't end. Passengers and crew reported strange occurrences. Voices in empty corridors, unexplained cold spots, figures trying to communicate. The ship's reputation for supernatural activity eventually led to retirement from regular service and conversion to a floating museum dedicated to maritime mysteries. The séance had opened a door between worlds of living and dead. That door could never be completely closed. The spirits of forgotten passengers had found their voice, and they would continue making their presence known to anyone willing to listen. The cruise industry would never be the same after Captain Morrison's investigation revealed truth about how passenger deaths were handled. Regulatory changes that followed would save countless lives in years to come. For Marina and other crew members, the experience became a defining moment, changing their understanding of life, death, and responsibilities to both. They'd learned some secrets are too important to remain buried. Sometimes the most powerful voices are those speaking from beyond the grave. The phantom séance became a beacon for spirits of those forgotten, ignored, deliberately silenced. Their messages would echo through the cruise industry for years, ensuring their deaths wouldn't be in vain and future passengers would be better protected. The séance accomplished what years of investigations had failed to achieve. It gave the dead a voice that couldn't be silenced. Their message would live on in improved safety standards and increased accountability. The spirits found peace, but their message would protect generations of future passengers. The ocean had always been a place of mystery and danger. But the phantom séance revealed that even in death, victims of maritime negligence, could fight for justice. Their voices had been heard, their stories told, their sacrifice made the seas safer for all who would follow. The Carnival triumph had been dead in the water for 3 days when civilized behavior finally cracked. What started as an inconvenience, a minor engine fire knocking out power, evolved into something much more sinister as 4,000 passengers and crew found themselves trapped with dwindling supplies and failing sanitation. The ship that promised endless buffets was now rationing food like a disaster zone. Maria Santos had been looking forward to this cruise for months. The 34-year-old teacher from Phoenix saved every penny for this Caribbean vacation with her 2 teenage sons, Miguel and Carlos. It was supposed to celebrate her divorce finalization, the beginning of a new chapter. Instead, she found herself standing in line for the 3rd day, waiting for meager rations. The food situation deteriorated rapidly after refrigeration failed. Elaborate buffets featuring fresh seafood and prime rib were reduced to peanut butter sandwiches, crackers, warm soda. Massive dining rooms transformed into distribution centers where crew handed out pre-packaged meals like aid workers. But the psychological transformation of passengers truly horrified Maria. These were people who'd paid thousands for luxury, accustomed to every need being catered to. Now they fought over stale cookies and argued about fair water distribution. The desperation in their eyes was something Maria had never seen. The look of people suddenly realizing comfortable assumptions about safety and abundance could shatter instantly. The breaking point came during evening meal distribution on Deck 12. Maria had been waiting over 2 hours with her sons, watching available supplies dwindle as the crowd grew restless. Ship's crew, exhausted from days of crisis management, struggled to maintain order as hundreds pressed forward. "There's not enough food," whispered an elderly woman behind Maria. "They're going to run out." Rumors spread like wildfire, creating panic rippling through assembled passengers. People began pushing forward, abandoning orderly queues. Maria felt herself shoved from behind as desperate passengers tried getting closer to distribution tables. Polite vacation demeanor replaced by raw survival instinct. The first fight broke out when a middle-aged man named Robert Kim tried taking 2 meal packages. The crew member monitoring distribution tried stopping him. Robert's wife immediately intervened, screaming they'd been shortchanged and deserved extra rations. Within seconds, other passengers joined the argument. "We paid for this cruise," Robert's wife shrieked. "We deserve the same food as everyone else." The crew member, a young woman named Lisa from the Philippines who'd been working 18-hour days, tried maintaining composure. But reasonable explanations were drowned by the increasingly aggressive crowd. Maria could see fear in the young woman's eyes as she realized the situation was spinning beyond control. Violence erupted suddenly. A large man in his 50s pushed past the crew member and began grabbing armfuls of food packages. Other passengers saw his actions and immediately followed, abandoning any pretense of order as they rushed distribution tables. Crew members, vastly outnumbered and untrained for riot control, were powerless. Maria watched in horror as the crowd transformed into a mob. Passengers fighting over crackers and water as if they were precious treasures. An elderly couple was knocked to the ground, trampled by younger passengers. Children cried as parents pushed them forward, using their size to squeeze through gaps. The primal nature shocked Maria most. These weren't refugees or disaster survivors. They were middle-class Americans who'd been on vacation days earlier. But breakdown of normal systems triggered something deep. Survival instinct overriding years of social conditioning. "Stay close to me," Maria told her sons, grabbing their arms. The crowd was dense and unpredictable. People pushing in all directions, fighting for position. The scene became increasingly disturbing as passengers began hoarding, stuffing pockets with far more than they could consume. A well-dressed woman in her 60s clutched a dozen packages, eyes wild with panic. College students formed a human chain, passing supplies back to a pile they guarded jealously. But families with children suffered most. Parents unable to secure adequate food became increasingly desperate, begging others to share or trying to trade jewelry for extra rations. Maria saw a mother offering her wedding ring for cookies for her hungry toddler, a transaction unthinkable days earlier. Ship's security finally arrived, but they were ill-equipped for a full-scale riot involving hundreds. Their attempts to restore order made things worse as people panicked about being cut off. The crowd surged forward with renewed desperation, several passengers injured in the crush. Maria found herself separated from her sons, desperately searching while trying to avoid being trampled. The rationale part understood this was temporary. Rescue would come. Normal life would resume. But the primitive part screamed she needed to secure food for her children. That survival depended on competing with other desperate parents. When she finally located Miguel and Carlos, they were pressed against a wall, faces pale with fear, watching adults behave like animals. The sight snapped Maria back to reality. Protecting them meant more than securing food. It meant maintaining their faith in human decency. "We're going back to our room," she told them firmly. "This isn't worth it." But leaving meant accepting they might go hungry. A decision requiring tremendous psychological strength, facing uncertainty about when normal conditions would resume. As they walked through corridors, Maria heard continuing sounds of conflict above. Shouting, crying, crash of overturned furniture. The aftermath was almost as traumatic. Ship's crew, overwhelmed by breakdown, implemented martial law restrictions. Armed security guards posted at distributions. Passengers required to present ID and submit to searches. The psychological damage was severe. Passengers who'd fought found themselves unable to look at each other without shame. Families that had been friends were now suspicious, wondering who might take their food if another crisis arose. Trust that made cruising possible was shattered, replaced by wariness persisting long after returning to land. Children were particularly affected by witnessing adult breakdown. Many had never seen parents or adults act with such desperation and aggression. The experience challenged fundamental assumptions about safety and security. Some required months of counseling, struggling to process what they'd witnessed. The food fight revealed something disturbing about human nature, that even in relatively minor crises, civilization's veneer can disappear with shocking speed. Passengers who fought weren't inherently evil. They were ordinary individuals pushed beyond their psychological breaking point. Maria and her sons eventually made it home safely, but the experience forever changed their understanding of human nature and social stability. They'd learned comfortable assumptions of modern life, that food would always be available, order maintained, adults behaving responsibly, were far more fragile than imagined. The Carnival Triumph was eventually rescued and returned to service, but the incident led to significant changes in emergency protocols and passenger management. The cruise industry was forced to confront that their passengers, when pushed to extremes, could become as dangerous as any external threat. The food fight lasted only a few hours, but its psychological impact would linger for years. They'd seen civilized people transform into desperate animals. They'd learned the distance between order and chaos was much shorter than anyone wanted to believe. The cruise, supposed to be relaxing vacation, became a lesson in fragility of human society and primal instincts lurking beneath our civilized exterior. The most disturbing aspect wasn't violence or desperation. It was the speed with which ordinary people abandoned moral principles facing adversity. Passengers who fought eventually returned to normal lives. But they'd carry knowledge they were capable of behavior they'd never imagined possible. The ocean had tested them in unexpected ways. Not all passed the test with their humanity intact. Isabella Rodriguez had always been a careful traveler. The 42-year-old accountant from San Antonio prided herself on meticulous planning. When she booked her solo cruise aboard the Royal Caribbean Voyager for a much-needed break, she researched every aspect. Safety record, security measures protecting passengers and belongings. The Royal Caribbean Voyager was a massive vessel carrying over 4,000 passengers, renowned for comprehensive security and professional crew. Isabella specifically chose this line because of their reputation for high safety standards. She'd read security briefings, stored valuables in the cabin safe, followed all recommended precautions for solo travelers. What she hadn't anticipated was that the greatest threat would come from someone she'd been trained to trust implicitly. Carlos Mendoza had been working as cabin steward on cruise ships for 7 years, building what appeared to be an exemplary service record. The 31-year-old from Honduras was known for friendly demeanor and willingness to go above and beyond. His personnel file was filled with commendations from grateful guests praising his attention to detail. What supervisors didn't know, Carlos had developed a sophisticated system for identifying and targeting vulnerable passengers, particularly solo travelers who carried valuables and appeared to have significant income. Isabella first met Carlos on her second day when he knocked to introduce himself and offer assistance. His smile was warm and genuine. His English, while accented, was clear and professional. He explained ship services, recommended restaurants and activities, even offered to help navigate the complex layout. Isabella was impressed by his thoroughness. Exactly the service she'd expected. "If you need anything at all, Miss Rodriguez, please don't hesitate to ask. I want to make sure your vacation is perfect." Over the next few days, Carlos proved helpful, as promised. He arranged fresh flowers, secured hard-to-get reservations, helped get premium show seating. Isabella found herself looking forward to his daily visits, grateful for personal attention making her feel valued. She began tipping him generously, shared stories about work, travels, life back home. What Isabella didn't realize, Carlos was conducting careful assessment of her financial situation and travel patterns. He noted expensive jewelry, designer luggage, casual mentions of her successful accounting practice. He observed daily routines, when she attended activities, when she went to meals, when she was likely away from her cabin for extended periods. Most importantly, he watched her interactions with the cabin safe, noted the combination she used, items she considered valuable enough to secure. The theft occurred on the 5th day during the ship's visit to Cozumel. Isabella had joined a shore excursion to explore Mayan ruins. An all-day trip Carlos knew would keep her away at least 8 hours. Using his master key and knowledge of security protocols, he entered her cabin mid-morning when most passengers were on excursions or attending activities. Carlos's method was sophisticated and carefully planned. He didn't ransack the cabin like a common burglar. Instead, he methodically searched belongings, looking for items valuable but not immediately missed. He avoided obvious targets like jewelry Isabella wore regularly, focused instead on backup items, cash reserves, electronics not used daily. He opened her safe using the combination he'd memorized, selected items easily concealed and transported off-ship. But Carlos made a critical error that would ultimately lead to his exposure. In his confidence and familiarity with systems, he became careless about covering tracks. He left subtle signs, items slightly out of place, drawers not quite closed. Most damaging, fingerprints on surfaces that should have been clean. He also underestimated Isabella's attention to detail and systematic approach to organizing belongings. Isabella discovered the theft almost immediately upon returning that evening. Her accountant's mind was trained to notice discrepancies. She quickly realized several items were missing from her safe, including $2,800 cash, a backup credit card, and diamond earrings that belonged to her grandmother. The robbery was professional enough someone less observant might not have noticed for days. But Isabella's methodical nature meant she knew exactly what should have been in her possession. The initial response from ship security was disappointing and frustrating. When Isabella reported the theft, she was treated with barely concealed skepticism, as if she might have simply misplaced belongings or forgotten where she stored them. The security officer seemed more interested in suggesting she had been careless than investigating a possible crime. "Are you absolutely certain these items were in your safe?" Sometimes passengers think they've secured items but actually left them elsewhere. Isabella's frustration was compounded by realization she was trapped on the ship with her thief, unable to seek help from outside law enforcement or escape the situation. Ship security protocols were designed to protect the cruise line's reputation rather than pursue justice for individual passengers. She quickly understood she'd receive little help recovering her property. But Isabella wasn't the type to accept defeat easily. Using professional skills and analytical mind, she began conducting her own investigation. She reviewed interactions with crew members, analyzed who had cabin access, thought carefully about who might have observed her using the safe. Carlos's name quickly rose to the top of suspects, but she knew accusations without proof would be dismissed. The breakthrough came when Isabella remembered Carlos had been in her cabin the previous morning when she retrieved items from her safe. She'd been so comfortable with his presence, she hadn't thought to shield the combination. More importantly, she recalled he'd been unusually interested in her shore excursion plans, asked detailed questions about itinerary and duration. Isabella's investigation revealed a pattern pointing clearly to Carlos. She discovered he'd been asking other passengers about excursion plans, always friendly and helpful, disguising true intentions. She also learned he'd been working extra shifts, volunteering to cover for other stewards, giving him access to cabins throughout the ship. The confrontation came on the final night when Isabella decided to force the issue by directly accusing Carlos. She'd prepared carefully, gathered evidence, planned her approach to maximize chances of getting him to admit guilt. When Carlos arrived for his final check-in, Isabella was ready. "I know you took my things. I know you watched me use the safe combination. I know you had access to my cabin during the shore excursion. I want my belongings back." Carlos's reaction was immediate and telling. Instead of expressing shock or confusion, he became defensive and angry. Carefully maintained professional demeanor, cracking under pressure. He denied accusations, but body language and emotional response suggested guilt rather than innocence. Most damaging, he provided too many details about his whereabouts during the theft. Details Isabella hadn't requested, suggesting he'd been thinking about alibis. "You can't prove anything. It's your word against mine. I have 7 years of excellent service records. Who do you think they'll believe?" But Carlos had underestimated both Isabella's determination and ship security systems. When Isabella reported the confrontation, security was finally motivated to conduct thorough investigation. A search of Carlos's cabin revealed several items reported stolen by other passengers, along with a notebook containing detailed observations about passenger behavior and cabin security. Investigation revealed Carlos had been operating a sophisticated theft ring for months, targeting solo travelers and passengers appearing to have significant wealth. He'd stolen thousands in cash, jewelry, electronics, selling items at ports, building a network helping dispose of stolen goods. Isabella's case was latest in a series attributed to passenger carelessness rather than criminal activity. Carlos was arrested when the ship docked in Miami, charged with multiple counts of theft and fraud. Investigation revealed he'd been working with accomplices both on and off ship, creating a criminal enterprise operating under the cruise line's nose for years. His arrest led to broader investigation uncovering systemic security failures and inadequate background checking. For Isabella, resolution was bittersweet. She recovered some stolen items, but the experience fundamentally changed her relationship with travel and trust in service providers. The cruise, supposed to be a relaxing break, had become a lesson in traveler vulnerability and importance of remaining vigilant even in seemingly safe environments. The aftermath led to significant changes in cruise industry security protocols. Stronger background checks, revised cabin access procedures, passenger education programs helping travelers protect themselves. But for Isabella and other victims, these changes came too late. The case also highlighted complex legal challenges prosecuting crimes on cruise ships. International nature, combined with jurisdictional issues when crimes occur in international waters, creates obstacles preventing justice. Isabella's persistence and analytical skills were crucial in bringing Carlos to justice. But many other victims might not have had resources or determination to pursue their cases. Years later, Isabella would reflect on the experience as a turning point in understanding personal security and trusting instincts. She'd learned predators often hide behind positions of trust and authority. That vigilance must be maintained even in environments appearing safe and controlled. The cruise industry marketed itself as secure, worry-free vacation experience. But Isabella's experience revealed a darker reality that criminals could exploit the very systems designed to protect passengers. The phantom thief had been caught, but damage he caused would linger in victims' memories for years. Isabella never took another cruise, chose instead to travel in ways giving her more control over environment and security. She became an advocate for stronger passenger protections and transparent reporting of cruise ship crimes, using her experience to help others avoid similar victimization. Some say these stories ended that night, but I still wake up thinking about them, about Jackson in that storage room, about Peyton on the poop cruise, about Taylor and what happened to her, about all of them. Thanks for listening. If you made it through the darkness with me tonight, you know why these stories matter. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, share this with someone who needs to hear it. Because sometimes the most important thing we can do is remember and make sure it never happens again.